Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong and StormForge. My name is Cody J. Brown. I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead, but first I have a few housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of our discussion, or you just like to share it after the fact, the on-demand will be emailed to you shortly after we conclude today's webinar. You can also find it living on the DevOps website. If you have any questions for our panel today, we want you to use the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen and direct any questions that you have for them right there. And in the chat tab, that's where we want you to just talk with one another or let us know where you're tuning in from. Finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So stick around to see if you're one of our 4 lucky winners. On to our panel today. Our topic is solving the Kubernetes complexity gap by optimizing with machine learning. And I'm joined today by Matt Provo, CEO at StormForge, James Governor, co-founder of RedMonk, Charlie Dublin, Vice President of Product Management at Aqui, and Rich Bentley, VP of Product Marketing for StormForge. And it's my pleasure at this point in time to turn the floor over to Rich to get us started. Thank you all so much for being here with us.
All right, thank you, Cody, and thanks everyone for joining. I think we've got a really compelling event for everyone today, talking about, as Cody said, using machine learning to help manage the complexity of Kubernetes. So we've kind of broken the session up into 2 main parts today. So first, we'll have a panel discussion with the 3 individuals that Cody mentioned at the top of the broadcast, and then after that, we'll have Matt take us deeper into the product announcement that we made today. So we just announced a product called Optimize Live, which really helps enterprises turn observability into actionability, provides actionable recommendations for improving the efficiency of Kubernetes production environments. And then finally, we'll leave some time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. And just enter those, as Cody said, in the interface. So just to repeat, the panel that we have today, really great to have 3 really different perspectives on this space. So Charlie is from Aqui, which Aqui is they combine the flexibility of Drupal with the world's only open marketing cloud for an unrivaled enterprise digital experience platform. So Charlie and Aqui are a StormForge customer, so he brings a great perspective from that side of things. And then James Governor is co-founder of RedMonk, which is the only developer-focused industry analyst firm. And so I think James will bring a great perspective from his discussions with clients and vendors as well. And then Matt Provo, who is the founder and CEO of StormForge. Matt's a 3-time founder who has really dedicated his career to building world-class products. And so welcome, guys. Great to have you all.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
And with that, I'm going to stop the screen sharing and get everyone up here. And I want to start by talking about, the topic of this webinar is Kubernetes complexity, and that's a term that you hear a lot. Probably our audience has heard a lot, almost to the point that it's maybe become a cliche. But I want to get into kind of what the reality is. In what ways is it complex? How does that complexity affect developers, SREs, and others in organizations that are adopting Kubernetes? And Charlie, since this is something, sorry about that. And Charlie, since this is something you're kind of on the front lines of, I wanted to start with you and get your perspective here.
Sure. Yeah, I think the reputation of Kubernetes being complex, there's an element of truth to it, but sort of following the Spider-Man principle is that with great power comes great responsibility / complexity. And so some of that complexity is good in that it gives you fine-grained control of resource allocations, allows you to optimize your applications for performance and cost and so forth. But it's also true that if you don't have a good plan of attack with it or leverage partners like StormForge and others, that the complexity can grow and get unwieldy if you're not careful. And so definitely puts an impetus on strategy, definitely puts an impetus on architecture and governance to leverage the full power correctly.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And James, you talk to a lot of RedMonk clients, I'm sure, that are in the process of adopting Kubernetes. What's your take on this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you're talking about this gap, the complexity gap. I mean, we talk about the developer experience gap at RedMonk, and I think that the Kubernetes is a pretty good example. That what we're seeing a lot of is there are a lot of choices. I mean, if you look at the general landscape of tools that you could use, particularly it's an open source environment, and we're seeing a lot of companies that are building out their own infrastructures for things like monitoring and so on. The thing about Kubernetes is that it's not just, oh, here is your container infrastructure, so let's go. Here's your orchestration system, let's go. It has impacts on your networking model and your storage model and so on. And then, of course, we've got the fact that a lot of organizations are thinking about it, at least its potential, in hybrid environments. So then you're in a place where you've actually it's one thing to have Kubernetes, but it runs slightly differently. Whether you're choosing to run something in GKE, the Google Cloud, or AKS, or EKS, or even if you're choosing Amazon. So there are specifics that you need to know, depending on which environment you're running it in. So it's one thing to say it's a portability layer, but there's plenty of complexity around that you need to consider.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, from your perspective, working with StormForge customers, what anything to add to the complexity question?
I mean, to shoot straight, the complexity piece, day two forward, is why we exist at StormForge. And on the front end, there is, as James was saying, this promise around portability and flexibility, which is totally true. I like what Charlie said around with great power comes great responsibility, because you do have a bunch of knobs that you can tune and turn now. How those knobs interact with one another and the impact that they're having one turn at a time becomes, as you operationalize and take things forward and move workloads into production, becomes just even more complex, more so than really any human from a tuning standpoint can manage, no matter their level of experience. You can only have 5 or 6 years of experience in a Kubernetes world anyways, but yeah, it's I definitely agree with the comments. This complexity piece really smacks a lot of people in the face as they're operationalizing, and that promise of cost savings and portability and some of these other things move to being questioned or at risk pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you kind of both or all three of you really touched on it. One result of the complexity is around a tendency for Kubernetes environments to operate less efficiently than they could be, and that's something that at StormForge we focus very much on. And while inefficiency might not sound like a huge problem, it can be a pretty big deal, right? Especially as organizations scale up for day 2 operations. So let's talk to that issue. What does inefficiency really mean to the business? What's the impact of that? And James, how about we start with you this time?
Well, we see across the board. I mean, we see this pretty much with every technology wave. Certainly, over the last few years, you get sprawl, and you end up with different groups doing their own, running their own infrastructure, and you sort of lose context. And we've seen that just with general cloud services. It's a real problem that efficiency in general is important, because especially in an environment, the question is, how do we get our hands around this and truly understand that cost? And I think organizations are getting caught out where they think, oh, it's open source technology, and this is something we're not worrying about so much. And then, as I say, suddenly they're like, oh, wait a minute, actually, let's look at our cloud spend, and you start adding it up across those different groups that are all doing their own things, and very quickly it does become, and certainly it becomes an issue, that sprawl, get it under management. And if you're running at scale and you're a bit more efficient and effective, then you're really thinking about a world of marginal gains, where the costs are there, but think if you're an organization, for example, like Spotify, small changes can have big effects in terms of savings. So I think that that's how I see it. That really efficiency is important. We may not think it is at the beginning of the project, but to Matt's point, once we get to day 2 or day 15 or day 50, yeah, we're going to suddenly find out that we're spending a lot more money than we realized.
Yeah, and Matt, how do you see that, affecting the customers that you talk to?
I mean, inefficiency equals a lack of ability to innovate. And when innovation is stifled, growth of the business and the reason that the talent was brought in the first place to help take the business forward and meet objectives, becomes questioned. And so, as we are consuming more resources from a cloud perspective, this question of efficient use and this requirement oftentimes to choose between something like cost or performance becomes a big pain point. To James, when James said sprawl, I couldn't help but thinking, like, did we actually learn from the growth of VMs? And there are so many parallels between that world and the Kubernetes world that we have to take into consideration as we continue to move forward. So the question will be, like, really, like, did we learn? And if so, like, how are we applying those learnings to how we think about efficiency in a Kubernetes environment as we take it forward?
So based on James shaking his head, I'm gonna say his answer is no, we haven't learned. But Charlie, why don't we get your perspective? This is something you deal with day to day. What do you,
Sure.
how is Aquia impacted by this?
Sure. I think the driver of inefficiency is critical, which is really you're dealing with imperfect information. And so businesses have to have some form of inefficiency to deal with that imperfect information. And so the quick analogy that I use is like you're going on a trip, but you don't know the destination. And so what do? You get your biggest suitcase, you pack it full of all types of clothes and shoes and everything else. And so, it's that imperfect information that's sort of driving your inefficiency in that example. And so in our world, we know Drupal really well at its core, but our customers, we provide a very flexible platform. And so how our customers use that platform is very complex. It varies by customer based on their traffic patterns, their application profiles, and the like. And so contending with that imperfect information means that we configure our resource allocations very inefficiently and make it as, the big suitcase type thing where we over provision because we really want our customers to have a good performance. And so where StormForge plays an important role is really providing that insight, and with a new product, the ability to act on that information much more quickly. So to me, it's really just how do you contend with imperfect information.
I love that analogy. In fact, I'm probably going to steal it from you, just so you know.
I have trademark rights on that. So,
so let's shift gears and talk about observability a little bit, because I think one of the responses to Kubernetes complexity has been the increased adoption of observability tools to get visibility and see what's going on in production. Most organizations that I've talked to, have multiple observability tools generating, massive amounts of data. But I want to kind of dive into what value these tools are providing and what gaps still exist. And Matt, I know this is an area I know you've spent time on as we develop the new optimized live solution. So I want to start by getting your take on that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the growth of an adoption from a observability and an APM standpoint. I definitely that visibility is absolutely vital. And so that's why we've invested in deep partnerships and integrations with people like Datadog and others that are really doing well in that space. To Charlie's point, you are dealing with imperfect information, and in an observability world, as great as the visibility is into what's going on, it is often reactive to events that in all likelihood already took place. And so when you combine sort of that from a data standpoint and an insight standpoint with an ability to be predictive and proactive on what you do about it. That's where it becomes pretty powerful. So I think you see the rise kind of observability, yes, but you also see a rise in sort of AI ops types of solutions. It's obviously where StormForge comes in on that side, but the capture of all of this data is incredibly valuable. But you don't want to sit on a mountain of assets without the ability to take advantage of that and connect it in real time to business objectives that you have. And so I think therein lies the opportunity between observability and what we do at StormForge.
Yeah, Charlie, how about at Aqui? What role does observability play there?
Yeah, I think as Matt suggests, the interplay is critical because if you've got insights without the ability to act, that's not that useful. If you can act but not know the effect of that through observability, that's not that useful. So you need both, and how you manage that both is, it's a challenge. And so I think the only additional point I would say is how one plans for that observability. How do you capture that information, deal with the volumes, how you make sense of that information, again, lends itself very, very clearly for machine learning type of applications for sure. And so, yeah, I guess in our experience, our observability log volume, it was more of a power curve and went up dramatically just because there's so much more knobs with Kubernetes versus our legacy infrastructure. To do that well meant we had to really expand rapidly our observability footprint. And so that's a huge challenge for us.
Yeah. James, how about from your perspective?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're just such a long way from the old world of being able to okay, I'm just going to SSH into my box and, work out what's going on with it. We're dealing with systems that are distributed by design and by nature. Then we're running distributed applications on them, microservices. So it gets back to that sort of complexity point that we've already mentioned. And yeah, clearly, I think the industry as a whole is trying to get a handle on this. I mean, you ask what are the gaps? I mean, I think the gap is the integration between them. So we've seen some environments that keep on popping up. I mean, obviously Prometheus and so on, but we're seeing a lot of roll your own. And those roll your own systems end up needing a lot of sort of care and watering and feeding and attention. I think Matt made the point, there's a lack of skills in the marketplace. And from that perspective, in order that we can, have a broad range of organizations that are able to take advantage of these Kubernetes-based systems and, understand what's happening in them and troubleshoot effectively. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole industry is trying to coalesce around, making sure we've got the logs, the metrics, and the traces all brought together. That we're thinking about, what observability means, and really coming at it from a troubleshooting perspective, and understanding that this is not just a world of, there are some dashboards that somebody is going to come along and look at later, but it's a much more active. We're making more changes to the system, and I think the fact that we're changing the system all the time means we need to understand it. In terms of those outputs. So observability, I just think is there are huge gaps, and those are about the fact that as an industry we're really only building out the tools, the methods, processes, and teams. At the moment, it's still quite early days.
Yeah, I love that perspective of kind of the need to move from reactive, watching dashboards to becoming more proactive and figuring out what to do to actually improve things before something breaks, right?
But yeah, the biggest resource gap in the space is people. It's having the people that have the skills in order to be build and manage distributed systems. So people is the real resource challenge.
Yeah, that's a great segue into the next topic, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of AI or machine learning, because I think a lot of times we think of that as potentially replacing people, but I don't think that's always the case, especially given where we're at in the industry. But I do think there's a role there that AI and machine learning can play in helping organizations get value from the data that they're collecting, to optimize and help improve the efficiency of their Kubernetes environment. So Matt, machine learning is obviously foundational to StormForge. So I wanted to start with you and get your take on that, and really how you came to realize that that technology could be applied to the problems that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the reason that I started the company. You have to have really great technology. You got to have a talented team, and you have to connect those solutions to pain points that are within a growing market opportunity. And with machine learning at the core, oftentimes we see it as a really big marketing budget and a lack of reality under the hood from a product perspective and a delivery perspective. And certainly, are we slapping machine learning on there just to do that, or is it actually the right solution to the set of problems that we're going after? And so, for us, we wanted to make sure that it was the right set of the right set of problems to be solving. And if you think about the number of parameters that can be tuned in a Kubernetes environment, when you're at, for the typical application, when you're at a couple of parameters, maybe a memory and a CPU, you might have 100 different combinations at any given time that you might be able to choose from. When you go to 5, that goes above 1 million, and when you go above 10 parameters, that's above 1 billion possible combinations, and that's just statically. And so we all know software isn't static, especially today. And so no human can keep up with that kind of multidimensional math that's required. And so it is the perfect set of problems for machine learning to attach itself to. One thing I really like to say, though, is that our role is to empower developers into the process, not automate them out of it. And so we are a huge believer in human augmented AI. So we want humans to be involved to the level that it makes sense. We want to automate the tasks that are taking up way too much of their time from a manual perspective, but we want them they know their application. We want them to be involved to say, and to continue giving feedback through the technology. But we don't want to automate them out. We want to empower them in to the process.
Yeah. So Charlie, can you talk about the role that machine learning has played at Aqui?
Sure. Yeah, I think just to tie it back to Matt's points real quick, I think firstly, you look at machine learning, you definitely want to apply it to environments where you have large data sets, number one. Number two is where you've got lots of complex variables, including variables that interact with one another. Third is that if you've got a decisioning landscape that changes constantly, those attributes lend itself very well to machine learning generally. So I think this is absolutely a great solution application of machine learning. Within Aqui, I definitely see it as a complement to the humans, because I want our engineering and architecture teams focused on core to us, which is really ensuring that customers have a good ability to host their Drupal applications. And so Drupal and Drupal expertise is really where I want my team focused. And so the StormForge capability provides insights into how things are operating. Kind of to my point earlier, you can tie your actions that you take in terms of how you allocate your resources and some of the decisions you make. You can get a feedback loop back into how well that's performing with assisted decisioning on alternative choices you can make based on price to performance. Very, very powerful. So it's a complement to our engineering team, and I would say plays to our strengths more than I view it as I don't view it at all as any kind of replacement for people. Makes the people much more effective and helps me manage the scale of applications that I have much more effectively. So,
yeah, it makes sense. And James, you work with a lot of clients who are, I'm sure, adopting AI and machine learning for various things. What do you see in your conversations?
Well, I mean, to be honest, and I think Matt was probably a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of sort of machine learning washing sort of going on, or there's a lot of things that are called machine learning that don't seem to have that may not have any oh yeah, this is machine learning, and then it turns out that's not the case. I think some of the services we use, it's sometimes there's mechanical Turks there, and it's like, oh yeah, it's not really a machine at all. It's just a well-designed service that gives a decent answer. But yeah, I think certainly when I look at the vendor landscape, there's certainly a lot more talk about the value of machine learning than we've really seen good, solid examples. The fact that the industry is still sort of looking for, a broad set of, the thing, image classification, or, sort of, text to speech, or these things, those are sort of particular domains. But I think in terms of operations, I think they're a good example that, Google famously getting more efficient in its data center usage using machine learning, but we don't have enough of those. So it's hard, and I think there's a degree of specificity that is required. And I mean, really, it's up to Matt and StormForge to prove that actually that they're gonna get these results in this domain. And yeah, if they do, in terms of understanding those usage patterns of Kubernetes systems in production, that will be extremely useful for a lot of folks. So I'm skeptical, but that's up to Matt to prove. The proof is in the pudding.
So was Charlie, so don't worry about it. He was skeptical too.
Yeah, I would say I was very skeptical, but yeah, I mean, just to put a finer point on it with some hard data. So we tested many applications. We put some of our best engineers on it, our top architects, to really try to beat the machine learning from the StormForge team. And we lost 100% of the time. And the degree with which we lost ranged from, the lowest was around 20 to 30%, highest was 90%, just in terms of performance and cost. So it's proven to be a robust solution. So.
Yeah, and I think approaching it with skepticism is certainly the right approach. It's a lot like, self-driving car, right? I'm not gonna trust it right away. I'm gonna make sure it works and see how it behaves before I trust it to with my family. So we just have a couple of minutes left, but I want to delve a little bit more into kind of the people aspect of this. We started out with that, and I think when we think about efficiency and optimization, normally we think about performance and cost, right? But I think there's also a people aspect of that, right? Because you can spend a lot of time and effort on trying to optimize your applications, make them run more efficiently, make your environment more efficiently. But there's an opportunity cost to that. And I think, we've talked about that a little bit, but I want to just delve into a little bit more of how organizations should think about and approach those trade-offs. And Charlie, why don't we start with you on that one?
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I definitely think of it in terms of core versus context. And I want my core focused on how to make our hosting platform the best for Drupal and the necessary expertise on that. And that footprint by itself is large. And I only want to do, I would say, core AWS infrastructure, Kubernetes, containers itself. I only want enough competency in there to be great at hosting Drupal and no more. And so if there's not tools available like what StormForge provides, then that means I have to bring more in-house, more resources, and it's very, very hard to scale just the expertise. We've tried to do it in different locations around the world. We've sourced it, and it's very hard to bring in enough capacity to do it, even in light of focusing on our core of Drupal. And so our opportunity cost is high given the employee expenses and so on. So any tool, StormForge or otherwise, that gives us points of leverage to allow us to focus on core is very valuable.
Yeah, Matt, let me get your perspective on that from working with other StormForge customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Charlie hit it on the head. I think that we have to answer to James's challenge, which, James, I'm a little competitive, so I'm gonna take that as an ongoing and continued challenge. We'll send you more case studies along the way. But I think Charlie hit it on the head. I mean, there's not only trade-offs for between cost and performance by application, but there are trade-offs on your people and where they're spending their time,
Mm-hmm.
and how they're, the investments you've made, in bringing in your team and building your team, and what is it, the term, the great resignation is upon us, and so people are moving to different organizations. And I think part of this is like, what's the experience they're having at Aquia versus somewhere else that they could be? What are they learning? What are they empowered to do? And I'm pretty sure for all the developers that are listening in, if we polled, it would be less than 1% of them would say, I'd love to spend 80% of my time manually tuning my applications,
Mm-hmm.
and or risking taking out of the box recommendations for how my app should be configured. And so I think that piece is really, really powerful, and if we focus on it effectively, it will not only drive continued innovation, it'll drive employee satisfaction and retention and growth, and all of these things that may have otherwise caused someone to pick up the phone when a recruiter reached out.
Yeah. So James, I'll let you have the last word on this topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Matt probably said something like I would have said. We are in an environment that's just extremely competitive for talent. There's a lack of skills in the market. It doesn't matter who you are as well. It doesn't matter who you are. You get companies, and you would think they've got incredible environments offering incredible challenges, great working environments, and then Apple comes along, and their Kubernetes team is getting bigger all the time. They're hiring a lot of the industry's top talent. So even those companies, we look at, of the FANG companies, they're all like gravitating to Apple. Like, and if they're competing with Apple for talent, let's look at the rest of the market where, you're a bank, you're a telco. There just is not, there are not enough people to go around, and the people that are there are demanding a good working environment. And we don't want to spend our time as developers. What developer wants to spend their time yak shaving? Really, like, what developer really wants to spend their time? Developer experience, I think, is just ever more important. We're seeing developer experience teams. We're talking about platform engineering and really building out infrastructure so that the developers can be more productive in doing their jobs because they have options. And I think that's the thing that Matt spoke to really well there. Let's build out a platform. Let's curate that platform such that we can make people productive. And it's like a bridge between operations and development in a way that both of them can be effective. So I think thinking about developer experience is more important than ever because, yeah, absolutely, people have options about where they can work. So give them a good working environment, give them the right tools and platforms, think about their needs. And that's where we are, I believe, as an industry today, really thinking about, it's satisfaction of the people on your team matters. And that's a change actually from how it was 10, 15 years ago. So that's the big challenge.
Yeah, that's a great way to close out this part of the discussion. I wish we had a couple hours because this has been really interesting, and I think our audience hopefully has found it really interesting as well. But we do want to get to kind of the big announcement. But Charlie and James, want to thank you both, especially for your time today and for sharing your insights. And Matt, thank you as well. But you're not done yet, so we're going to get back to the presentation and ask you to kind of walk through the product announcement that we made today.
Thanks.
Sounds good. And Charlie and James, also just want to say a big thanks to you. Appreciate you being here.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes running through some slides, and then there are hundreds of you that have joined us, which is pretty exciting. Some of you may have experience with StormForge already or know a little bit about us. Some of you may be just curious. And so we'll try to give you a little bit of insight into who we are and what we're up to, as well, of course, talk about what we're announcing today. So just real quick, StormForge started about 6 years ago. Always been focused on machine learning driven solutions at our core. To James's earlier point, we originally were applying our solution to energy consumption within a data center and large manufacturing environment. And we actually were on Docker Swarm at that time. And in our own lift and shift to Kubernetes is where we found the set of problems that we're solving today. And so we went through the classic pivot as an organization, and raised just over 70 million in funding at this point, and growing pretty rapidly. And super exciting for me to be a part of building the company and making sure that we're delivering on our promises, to James' point. So we want to introduce you to what we are calling Optimize Live as the second kind of big piece to our platform. And we've trademarked this phrase, turn observability into actionability. And so that's the core of who we are and what we're announcing today. And really, if we go to the next slide, our charge as an organization and as a set of solutions is to deliver on this promise. And these are questions that we, have heard from users for many years, and know that we have a significant opportunity to really set ourselves up, but ultimately set our users and our customers up for success by delivering on the charge that you see here on the screen. And so why? Why do we exist, and why is the solution timely when you think about the growth of the Kubernetes market in particular, but you also think about the growth and the transition to day two and forward operations, in a Kubernetes environment. What are some of them? And we've talked about these tangentially already, but to kind of coalesce some of the gaps and the challenges that I'm seeing every day that our customers are communicating and that we're interacting with them about, really falls into three buckets around the complexity gap, the data to value gap, and the skills gap. And so as organizations are moving their deployments, or their workloads into production, day two forward, they're increasingly hitting this cloud native wall. And so complexity, becomes too much for them to handle manually. And so while they're taking advantage, hopefully, of the flexibility connected with Kubernetes, this downstream complexity is really significant. Many of you are probably either planning for or reacting to, running into that wall. And then secondly, as we touched on, so much more data is being captured through observability and other ways. And so that's only going to continue to accelerate, at an exponential rate. And so the amount of data that's being captured is only going to increase. What you do with that data to not only, to capture the associated value with it becomes the big question. And so while observability tools are definitely providing a bunch of value, what we would say in that informed stage, really the next step is taking action on what you do or what you do with that data, because it is an asset for the organization. And then lastly, we do address and talk about the skills gap, and I just, you really can only have 5 or 6 years of experience with Kubernetes, and as great as that is, as we were talking about, the market is very competitive, and we see a lot of transition and turnover with people moving between organizations. And so there is this increasing kind of skills gap that we see within the environment, and that becomes kind of the challenge. We often work with customers that say, so and so are my Kubernetes people, and there's usually a few of them. And so, we want to be a part of helping to solve for that as well. And so what's the problem that we're connected to at StormForge? And we've talked about this as well throughout the time today, but resource management in particular is directly and most acutely connected to this new level of complexity that only continues growing. And so when you deploy an app, as you all know, in a containerized environment, there's a bunch of configuration decisions that you need to make. Memory, CPU, requests and limits, replicas, et cetera. And, if you think about all of those decisions, especially when you connect those to things like application specific settings, JVM heap size, garbage collection, et cetera, it just becomes pretty overwhelming pretty quickly. And so when you multiply that then by the number of containers, because the parameters that are connected with these applications are definitely interrelated. As I was mentioning earlier, the number of possible combinations just shoots through the roof and is very, very challenging to keep up with. And so every different decision or combination results in different outcomes. And so we want to be able to kind of set ourselves in the middle of all of that chaos, if you will, and help smooth that out to really give a clear path to value for our customers. And so alongside that complexity, there's a bunch of choices. Do I over provision? A lot of organizations do that just to be safe. But as they're scaling, day two and forward, that becomes really expensive, as you know. Cloud costs for many of our customers and organizations that we talk to can rise to nearly 70 to 80% of their revenue, and so it's just not sustainable. If you don't over provision, you can try to be more frugal, if you will, with your resources. And you're creating a problem of risk for yourself at that point. So CPU, things like CPU throttling and the ever-present out-of-memory errors obviously connect to a bad user experience. And so the reality or the ability to know how many resources to allocate to hit your performance goals isn't necessarily intuitive. And so another big choice that you need to make. And then lastly, and by the way, none of these options are great, as you know. You can choose to tune your application through what we would call trial and error. And you can take a somewhat scientific approach, change one variable at a time and see what the impact is. And a lot of organizations are doing that. And the result is just spending a bunch of time on this, which, as I mentioned earlier, it means that you're not spending time innovating or in other areas that could be more efficient use of your time. Not to mention, pretty ineffective at scale. And so, none of the options are great. And so, what does that all mean from a pain point standpoint and from a StormForge platform standpoint? And so, historically, StormForge has operated exclusively in a non-production environment. We call this our experimentation part of our platform. We have our own performance testing tool, and organizations take advantage of that. Often, performance testing or load tests historically has been our single data input for the machine learning in a non-production environment. And so we give you the ability to set up all kinds of different scenarios and experiment through that, and ultimately return configuration options back to you that are connected to the goals and objectives that you have for that application. You don't have to use our performance testing if you don't want. We've got test cases and ability to integrate into a bunch of the tools that are out there in the market today. So we often speak with organizations who may have load tests in place for a specific number of their applications. Typically, we see that for the kind of higher profile applications. where they've spent the time to set up the load tests and really gone through those steps. And so whether you have load tests or not today, we have the ability to either integrate or provide that solution for you, again, in a non-production environment. And what we're adding to the platform, or have added to the platform, releasing today, is what we call Optimize Live. And so Optimize Live works in a production environment. It's what we call our observation-based optimization. We're launching with out-of-the-box integrations with Datadog and Prometheus, and adding a bunch more, some of which that you can see on the slide here, to be able to take observability or telemetry data in particular as an additional data point. And so over time, what you'll see from StormForge is that we continue to focus on machine learning driven optimization for Kubernetes applications, specifically tied to resource allocation and efficiency. But we will keep adding additional data inputs. So we'll go down the stack. As James mentioned earlier, we'll add things like traces and logs and other data inputs. But Optimize Live is pretty exciting and a huge step for us in the ability to work in both a non-production and production environment, and giving our users the ability, per the needs of their application, to either use one piece of the platform, to use both of them. We don't require you, they share an infrastructure, and so it's one platform, but depending on the needs that you have, you can go either direction to Optimize Pro or Optimize Live. And so if you look at it from sort of the DevOps lifecycle point of view, this is really where we see ourselves fitting. And so our overall goal at StormForge with all of this is to make optimization, whether that's continuous or systematic, a part of the delivery process. We believe no application should be released or managed without going through the optimization set of steps, to be able to make sure that you no longer have to choose between those trade-offs across things like cost or performance, and you can continue to meet and exceed your SLAs and your SLOs and overall your business objectives. And so how does Optimization Live or Optimize Live work exactly? Fairly straightforward, but I'll explain it just a little bit. As I was mentioning, we use observability data as the input, and our machine learning is using that from a historical usage and trend standpoint to ultimately make predictive recommendations on different settings that you could put into place for your application, things like CPU and memory settings. You have the ability to configure each application for automatic or manual approval of these recommendations. So going back to my comment around empowering humans into the process, we know that our users know their application. We don't. And so we want to give them the ability to decide what level of automation are they comfortable with. And we give you the ability to configure it, across that spectrum from manual to completely kind of set and forget or automatic. And we'll go into we'll show a couple screens here in a minute on what that experience is like. And then if you specify automatic approval, the recommendation gets automatically patched and to the deployment itself in a production environment. It'll keep watching things and repeating that process, and ultimately give you the ability to kind of put your optimization on autopilot, if you will. So what does the experience look like in configuring an application with Optimize Live? Pretty quick and easy to get going. We need to obviously have you specify container resources that you're interested in tuning. You then specify kind of what we call the guardrails. for the resources if you want to stay within a particular range. We give you what we call risk tolerance. So how aggressive do you want to get? More aggressive means higher likelihood of throttling, but we do give you the ability to choose kind of that level of risk. And then we also give you the ability to decide how frequently you want the machine learning to recommend settings. And then lastly, we give you the ability to specify, as we were talking about earlier, automatic or manual approvals of these recommendations. And so if you do choose manual recommendation, we just are showing here what that experience looks like for you. And you can see on the screen here a recommendation that came in. You have the ability to dive a bit deeper into container level kind of details. And then you have the approval button, if you will, which ultimately causes the deployment to be patched. If you were to take the automatic route, that button, would not be there, and ultimately, based on your choices, the deployment would be patched automatically. And so here on this screen, we're basically showing you we're giving you some visibility into some of the potential results or the kind of results that we're seeing, on an ongoing basis. We obviously track actual usage. We track things like the CPU and memory requests and limits, and ultimately we give you line of sight into the OptLive recommendations that took place, trended over time. And we do both set a baseline because we want to make sure we know that we're providing value. And we also, in a world where the VPA is a part of this, is a part of the scenario, we do have the ability to show, to give visibility into how are the recommendations from Optimize Live, competing with or exceeding what the VPA would have recommended or did recommend for that application. So that's a lot of information, and we'll open it up for some questions in just a minute. But I did want to just make sure people understood when should you use Optimize Live and when should you use Optimize Pro. And so, the quick and dirty answer is that really both approaches are important, depending on the application and the intended outcomes. When you combine experiment-based learning with observation-based learning, you ultimately can achieve the best outcomes. But most customers that we talk to and that are using our products or our platform are using Optimize Live across a broader set of their application ecosystem. And just to give a little bit of contextual data, we usually see that Optimize Live is used across 60 to 70% of the application ecosystem, and then Optimize Pro is used across about 20 or 30% of their application ecosystem. And so starting with Optimize Live in many cases, and this goes for all of our design partners and customers and a bunch of organizations and users that have been a part of our process in even designing and building Optimize Live as the additional piece, have seen this opportunity to make an entry point with Optimize Live. It's very quick to get going and to get started. And then organizations are using Optimize Pro for some of their increasingly complex, even more complex applications. Sometimes we call it mission critical. And again, we often find that those applications are ones that have load test built, and taking the optimization to an even greater level is something that people can do with Optimize Pro. The combination of both of these in the same platform, sharing an infrastructure, sharing an experience, ultimately gives our users and our customers the opportunity to take advantage of both for their applications. And last slide here, we obviously want to just communicate about some of the StormForge differentiations and things that we think of as key important areas for you to consider. And so first, most organizations are generating a bunch of data with observability, but again, there's this gap between visibility and actionable insights. And so we help you close that gap. Second, the ability to do scenario testing and experimentation in a non-prod environment is certainly valuable and key to understanding application behavior. But it does, and it comes along in connection to some of these challenges around cloud native architectures. And so Optimize Pro really gives you that ability. Really StormForge is the only company that offers both approaches in the same platform. And the last thing to think about is as we think about fast time to value and really reducing the amount of effort that it takes to get going and ultimately receive value from the platform. Our machine learning approach, which is patented, is really important and a differentiator because it's multidimensional. And so this really means that you don't have any bounds on the parameters or the objectives that you would like to go after from an optimization standpoint. You can connect those to business trade-offs and ultimately scale your applications without having to choose between those key metrics. So with that, we want to give you a couple resources here on how you can learn more. And you could scan this QR code. Definitely head over to stormforge.io and check out, take a deeper dive through explainer videos and all of our content, customer stories, etc. And I think we've got just a couple of minutes left to open it up for a few questions.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Bunch of questions out there, but we are getting short on time, so maybe we'll just tackle a couple of them and then answer the rest offline afterwards. First question is around observability tools and what observability tools can Optimize Live work with? Yeah,
so as I mentioned, we've launched out of the box with Datadog and Prometheus, and so we'll be adding more shortly with things like Dynatrace and others. But out of the box today, you're looking at Datadog and Prometheus.
Cool. And then you mentioned the VPA or the vertical pod autoscaler. Can you talk a little bit more about how Optimize Live is different from that?
Yeah, so we do view the VPA and the VPA recommendations as kind of our competitor in many ways. Only 1% of developers in the Kubernetes ecosystem use the VPA, and so why is that? One, it's difficult to get going. It's not super compatible with the cloud native toolchain, and ultimately, the recommendations, are connected to events that have already already taken place, and so with Optimize Live, we are taking those recommendations and we're making them proactive and predictive, and finding that the gap between what the VPA is recommending and between actual and recommendation oftentimes is resulting in a bunch of CPU throttling and over provisioning and slack, if you will. Whereas our approach from an Optimize Live standpoint is beating the VPA typically by 10, 20, 30% at a time, and really never putting the application in a situation where it's gonna go down or consume too many resources.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Well, unfortunately, we are just about out of time, so we'll wrap it up there, but echo what you said to encourage folks to go to the website, check out additional resources. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Cody. Oh, we can't hear you, Cody.
And thank you so much. So I'd like to thank Matt, James, Charlie, and Rich for taking the time to join our discussion and share their expertise with us. I'd also like to remind our audience again that today's session was recorded. So following the webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to access the recording on demand, or you can also find it living on the DevOps website. Just visit devops.com/webinars. So quickly, we have 4 $25 Amazon gift cards to give away. So our first winner is Nikki F. Our second winner is Clement B. Our third winner is Cody C. And our fourth and final winner is Amy Y. So keep an eye on your inbox to claim your gift cards. And if you don't see an email, just check your spam folder. I would like to extend our gratitude to StormForge for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience. We appreciate you being here with us for the entirety of today's presentation. Please take a moment to fill out our post-webinar survey, and we hope to see you at a future TechStrong Learning webinar. This is Cody J. Brown signing off.